Navigating difficult holiday conversations. You're probably here because this is something you're struggling with, as a lot of us do. Oh, look at those pictures. We're looking pretty snazzy,
Ooh,
huh?
very,
Here we are.
very.
We already did some introductions, so we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so here's a disclaimer before we begin. This conversation will presume that you want to stay in a relationship with people you disagree with. Right? We're assuming that the difficult conversations we're having is because people disagree about things. Otherwise, you get along and everything's gravy, right? So presumes that you want to stay in a relationship with people you disagree with, which you don't have to. You don't have to be in a relationship with anybody you don't want to be in a relationship with. But if you want to, and you want to stick it out, and you want to work on it, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we presume that it's safe for you to be in those relationships. We want to send a very loud message, loud and clear, that if you are dealing with someone who is abusive or manipulative or toxically narcissistic or does not have your interests at heart, please seek professional help. So we want you to be safe first and foremost. For everyone else dealing with kind of more run-of-the-mill conversations, even the challenging ones, that's what we're going to be talking about tonight.
I appreciated your a slight holiday pun. You said if your relationships are gravy.
Oh, potatoes and gravy. Yeah, I was gonna say groovy, and then I thought, well, I'll try to be cool. That's what happened in that moment. So I don't know if we want to do some introductions. I know Kasia said they're not available for audio at the moment, but just listening, which is totally fine. Hall, do you want to talk about what brings you to this conversation?
Oh, well, gosh, you, Mel. But and I'm one of her aunts. She has a few. Gosh, that I feel like I'm still in recovery mode from the last 4 years, and the beat still goes on. But I have often thought, particularly during this time frame, that I wanted to be able to navigate conversations better. And not sure what I learned about your book, Mel, last year, though, for sure. And I went to a then called Better Angels, now Braver Angels. Do I have that right? Maybe I have those right in reverse. Yeah, yep. At my church, just about a year ago, and just started building some more knowledge, if you will. And I'm always someone who's in learning mode. So a lot of things have coalesced here, and Mel knows it took me forever to get a hold of her book. Long story, but I have it now, just recently. So I'm slowly making my way through, and I mentioned before, I've been very focused on election work, so I think I'll be able to shift gears a little bit.
Right on. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Hi, Kasia. Is it Kasia or Kasia?
Kasia.
Kasia, that's beautiful. Hi, welcome. What brings you to this conversation?
So definitely during the election time and even before, I've had a lot of difficult conversations with family related to either racial injustice or just disliking, different political candidates. So it's one thing that has been a point of contention over the past 6 months especially. And I would say I'm not particularly graceful when it comes to disagreeing with people. So I'm hoping to learn how to have productive conversations when you disagree with someone.
Awesome. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. So I'm so glad you're here. And for all of us, please feel free to jump in, interrupt, offer words of wisdom, things that have worked for you. I want this to feel, like an interactive experience, not just like a lecture. So, and especially for Tychelle as my co-host. So first and foremost, let's identify the hard. The first thing I want to say is that we don't hold disembodied beliefs, right? Our beliefs don't exist out here, just in our minds. They impact our real bodies and the bodies of our neighbors. So the stakes feel high because they are high. And they're higher for some than for others, especially for those whose rights are on the line or who are experiencing oppression or or anything in that nature. Whether we like it or not, our disagreements impact relationships because it's hard to be close to people who see the world differently than we do, right? It's hard to look at someone you love and say, how in the world can you say you value peace and justice and freedom if your definitions of those words are so drastically different from mine, if we just see the world so differently? And a lot of times we are thrown into these situations and we don't get training on de-escalating, on respectful debate, on healthy disagreement. And often these conversations will either implode and self-destruct and we shut down, or they'll explode, right? And they'll kind of go nuclear. And I've had conversations like that with my family, with my friends, just horribly nuclear fights where it really doesn't feel like the relationship is even stable anymore. And that's really painful for everybody, right? And before I get to the next point, I want to ask if anybody has any thoughts on that, because a lot of us are going through this right now in the thick of it, and it's really, really hard.
Now, I was just going to add that, what you, especially point number 3, like really seeing like is that you want to be with the person, you love the person, especially, I guess in this newness of certain things happening, things you didn't expect a person to think about or see them very, very differently. And I think especially people are experiencing that with parents, right? With friends, it's a little bit different. With parents, because they raised you, right? And that difference can be very polarizing. You can think back to the time of being like a teenager. They say when you are a teenager, you're about half the age your parents are most times, and you see the world very differently. So going through that cycle again, I think can be really, really hard. The person you love, the person who raised you, seeing things differently in the world than you see them. So I wanted to just amplify that and that hardness.
Thank you. Or siblings, I told a few people I love during this last election cycle that they lost my respect, and I said, I'm not trying to punish you. I'm not trying to be mean, but that's just the reality of it. You lost my respect, and I don't know how else to say that, right? So sometimes it's the hardness comes from having to say really tough things out of a sense of love and duty and justice that people don't want to hear and aren't going to take nicely, right? And that leads into the next point too. It's important to remember that there are larger forces at work than what we feel on an individual level, right? So we're not just dealing with our family and friends and that conflict there, right? We're being impacted by what's happening in our local community, in our neighborhood. We're being impacted by all of the national strife, the political strife, the religious strife, the social justice strife. And then in the larger context, the global, the climate change and the wars and the international things that are happening. So I like to say that we have concentric circles of conflict like bearing down on us. And by the time we drill down to these individual levels, it's almost like we feel those global forces at work in our lives. And it is interesting because now more than ever, we have so much information available to us at all times. I don't think we are evolutionarily equipped to handle all of the information that flies at us on a regular basis. Like we're just inundated all at once, and humans, that's a very new thing in history for humans to have, right? 100 years ago, you read the paper, news came once a month or something, right? So you didn't hear all the things all the time. So it already increases our levels of anxiety. So by the time we drill down to that nuclear level, all of that stuff has already impacted us, right? So for me, it's a little overwhelming to think about, but it also brings me a little bit of relief because some of the conflict I'm experiencing isn't my fault or that person's fault. They're just bigger things happening around us, right? So I want to talk about polarization because this is a word a lot of people are using right now. And I'm sure you know what it means, but I want to kind of spend some time with it here because I think it's really important to focus on in difficult conversations. Polarization is when people are pushed apart to extremes, right? Extreme beliefs, extreme ideologies. And it's really important to note that this is often manufactured for a monetary or political gain. And that sounds like a conspiracy theory to say that when I hear myself say it. But you can read articles in Time Magazine, New York Times, the most reputable news sources in our country that talk about, for example, Russian disinformation campaigns. There are international actors trying to pull American society apart at the seams and make us crumble from within and attack each other from within. Those are forces at work. Those are global forces at work impacting our interpersonal relationships. And we also know that news networks sell more news when people are polarized and when things are sensationalized. And we also know that political parties gain followers and they make more money when people are afraid of the other side, right? So polarization is benefiting someone. It's not the average American, right? And that's very frustrating. That's extremely frustrating. Polarization can be rooted in disinformation, like I said, just straight misunderstandings, right? I had someone recently on social media say, well, liberals just want to eat babies. And I'm like, that's just not true. It's just not true. Like you're basing your information on untruth, right? So that causes polarization when we just simply misunderstand each other and when there's confusion. When we fear and demonize each other, when we fail to have empathy. Oh, Republicans are bad. I wish ill on them. I can't see them as a human being. I can't see that. I can't respect their rights anymore, right? That's when empathy has started to break down, and it's hard because sometimes these failures of empathy have been in response to another failure of empathy. Well, you don't respect me, so why should I respect you? You don't respect my rights, so why should I respect your rights, right? So it's kind of an eye for an eye mentality. And then another way polarization can happen is with power imbalances and injustice. If one group of people has a lot of power and another group of people has very little power, that's going to cause polarization because the people with a lot of power are probably going to want to hang on to it, and the people without power are going to say, hey, wait a second, this isn't fair, right? And it causes this if people are not willing to share and negotiate in that. And like I said, polarization can also be simply rooted in just different visions of the world, the way the world ought to be. If you have two people who both believe the world should be loving, and one person says, well, the world should be loving and being gay is antithetical to that love, and the other person says, no, being gay is love, they both think the world should be loving, but they have radically different visions of what that looks like, right? Any thoughts on polarization? Is this something you feel? I feel it every day in this country.
Constantly.
Yeah.
I don't know, my view of polarization, I really sit on the point that you talked about and how it makes money for people, right? Because there's always been some sort of polarization in our society, right? But how it gets played up by media, by politicians, it makes it seem it's even more ripping at the seams, right? Where we can see polarization happening, right? We can say everybody feels polarized, but then you can look out and see social justice marches and see hundreds or thousands of people around the world. So it always counters, I think, in both parts of it. I think we see it more, like you talked about, like seeing, we didn't get the news as much as we did. We didn't have a running news. It's kind of like the only running news we had is outside of those buildings where it was like I forget what it's called, the ticking clock.
Yeah.
Right. That was what we got, and you'd have to stand there and read it to hear it, but it wasn't like a video. But I think it's a little bit different because when I think about the polarization that we experience as a person of color, for me, I feel like we see it more, but it's always been there. Versus people saying we're so polarized. I'm like, this is more. It is more. I think white folks seeing what is there now, right? Like it's uncovered. So it was more ostrich with your head in the sand, and now you can see it, but it's always been there. So people are just showing what their polarization is. But then on the counter to that, and I know you'll talk about this going forward, about how together we are as well, right? And when we're marching through the streets or we're coming together to do certain things. But so I see both of it, but it does make money for folks, right? It does make for lack of a better terminology, it makes America look like a really good reality TV show. It makes for good television.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So transitioning now into more skills and kind of self-awareness kind of stuff. Now that we've identified the problem that we face, how can we really start rethinking the way we see conflict is really the goal, to change our relationship with conflict even, perhaps. So I want to offer this first and foremost. All of us have a style of disagreement or a style of conflict. Maybe you've never given much thought to it, but you probably have one that you stick to on a more regular basis. And I didn't really think about this much until I studied this in grad school and seminary. So let me just quickly go through the list, and then I want to hear from you. What's your go-to style if one of these rings particularly true? And then I want to hear what you think is best for community. And note that none of these are necessarily bad. Some of them are better than others, right? For community, but I don't want to shame anybody for like, oh, you have a bad style. This is just natural. Like, it arises from our family systems and our experiences in life and our personality, all kinds of factors. So avoidance, people who just run away, right? Totally valid. I don't want to deal with this. I'm leaving, right? It's too much. Or shut down, right? Then you've, on the polar opposite, you've got brawlers, people who are putting up their dukes saying, oh, I'm gonna fight you. Here we go. I know folks like that who are just always like on Facebook saying, everyone's going to hell all the time. Right? Brawlers. Then there's what I call conciliators, people who rush to resolution really quickly. They're usually people in the corner saying, oh, let's just get along, everybody. Ah, conciliators, right? Then you have your debaters. I tend to be a debater, someone who kind of intellectualizes the issues and just wants to get all their data and boom, 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 let's argue. Let's debate it out, right? Then you've got your devil's advocates. There's usually one in every group who just likes to be oppositional, and that can be either really helpful or really not helpful, right? Depending on how the person does it. And then the last style I would say is a cooperative style. Somebody who wants to work with other people to gain greater understanding and greater insight into everyone's world and share power and give everyone space to speak. And that's a rare style. I think that's actually a skill set that a lot of us we don't learn unless we make a point to learn it, right? Because it's not culturally, it's not cultural for us. So those are some styles I've come up with. Do any of these ring true for you?
This is Holly. Well, Hall to Mel. I think the category I'm mostly in is debater. That's just my nature. I'm trying to foster some of the cooperative style, and I tried to park some, key points in my head and lately, and one of those is look for areas where you agree. When I'm in conversation with someone I generally don't agree with, or we have some pretty opposite views. But you're right, that's a hard style to live in. Maybe that's a worthy goal. So for the most part, a debater.
Thanks.
How
about you, Cassia?
So I think I'm also a debater. And sorry, my internet's a little slow right now, so I might be cutting out. But yeah, I think I'm a debater, and my main problem is that I usually want to win. Like, I'll listen to someone if they have valid arguments, but I usually feel like the other side isn't necessarily bringing the same level of detail or thought process to their argument that I am. So I get really annoyed if I'm in a debate with someone, or I feel like I'm in a debate with someone and it's not like equally matched. But I agree that I think cooperative would definitely be a better style to move towards, which is, why I'm here. So.
Right on.
I would say I'm between debater and cooperative. I like to see people's points of view. Also, it makes you a better debater if you can see people's points of view, so you can poke holes in their story, which I guess makes me a true debater rather than a cooperative. I skip right over devil's advocate. Mel knows that I'm like, devil doesn't need an advocate. People assume because I'm such a strong debater that I am a brawler, not physically, but like they think I'm arguing, and I'm like, no, I actually really do not like to argue. I like to debate, and I enjoy debating on many different topics. It doesn't have to be, race or politics. It can be, we can be talking about finance, we can be talking about television shows, or, styles of clothing. I like to debate. So, but I like to hear other people's points of view, because I think it's worth hearing. So I would say 75% debater, 25 cooperative.
There you go. And not saying debate isn't a useful skill to have. It's great to know how to debate well, right? To craft passionate arguments, to be persuasive. That's great. The problem, like you identified, Cassia, is that a lot of times it focuses on winning and who's more skilled at debating versus actually, meeting someone where they are, right? So I want to talk briefly about this. Yes, that is a poop emoji. This is something that I've developed in my book, because a lot of times it's very hard to suss out what ideas to entertain and what ideas to say, no, we're not going to give a platform to that or acknowledge it as valid. How do you suss out a valid idea from an invalid idea? And especially in this day and age where conspiracy theories are flying around, a lot of people are openly embracing things like bigotry and hatred and supremacy. How do we do this? So the analogy I came up with was this. It's kind of crude, so I apologize. But let's say you're at a potluck, right? And everybody brings their dish. And the dish represents an idea. Everyone's got their own ideas. They bring it to the potluck. Ideally, you all share, you try each other's dish, and you have your favorites and you have your not so favorites, and you just don't eat those, right? But it's still at the table, okay? So what happens when some troll, some jerk, brings poo to the potluck and tries to pass it off as food? Obviously, you can't keep it on the table because it's not safe for human consumption, right? It brings death and destruction and chaos. We can't leave it on the table. So you have to remove it, right? So are there ways to remove it without also throwing the person who brought it in the garbage, is the question, okay? The further question is this. What happens if little Timmy brings his grandma's meatloaf to the potluck and you mistake it for poo? What does that do to him? And if you say, get that out of here, and you chuck it in the trash, is he ever going to want to come to your potluck again? Is he ever going to want to have a conversation with you again? Whereas if you were to leave it there and just nobody eat it, but like, you're allowed to be here, Timmy, with your awful, awful meatloaf, he might try other foods that expand his palate and introduce him to new ideas, right? So it's for his sake that he get to be at the potluck of ideas. So I think, we'll talk about shaming and cancel culture a little bit later, but that's kind of the idea. So there are 5 questions that I identified that you can ask yourself. Is this something that I should engage? Is this a dish that can stay on the table and maybe I just don't like it? Or is it actually something harmful that we need to take away, right? So the 5 ideas are this. Can it be supported, right? If it's just wildly false, it shouldn't be at the table because it's harmful. It's misinformation, right? Is it relevant? Some people will bring about, if they're having a conversation, bring something to say, well, what about this? Well, what about that? And they have nothing to do with what we're talking about at all. And they're just there. Those ideas are brought in just to distract everybody. I would say, we're not going to do that. We're going to shut the door on that right now. We're going to focus over here, right? And I'm sorry if I'm mixing the metaphors here. I hope it's all making sense. Is the idea well-meaning and does it resist harm? You might think it's harmful at its core, but is the person trying to mean well with it, right? Are they trying? Does the person trying to share power, or are they saying, no, I get to hoard all the power, or someone else gets to hoard all the power, right? Is it calling for dehumanization, or is it calling for power sharing? And is the person who brought it trustworthy? If this is not a trustworthy person, you shouldn't let them have free reign at the table, right? If you know that they're going to be harmful. So these are some ideas. So I made a flow chart. So these are some ideas that might be helpful to you as you're trying to suss out, should I entertain an idea or should I not? All right, so here are some more ideas. Any thoughts on anything we've covered so far? No? All right, so I believe there are 5 practices of resilient relationships. Resilient relationships meaning relationships that can handle the weight of conflict and not break on us, right? What do those 5 things look like? Showing up. You can't have a relationship with someone if you're just not ever around or you never engage them, right? seeing and being seen, which we'll talk about in a little bit, sharing power, disagreeing well, and surprisingly taking a break is one of the most important things, because we can't have a relationship if we're constantly in debate mode, right? So here are some ideas for resilient relationships. First of all, telling someone how much they matter, saying things like, we can disagree and I won't abandon you. I care about you enough to work through this. I want to learn from you. Will you please learn from me? I'll try to give you credit where it's due. I don't agree. I vehemently disagree with you, but I respect your right to believe what you want to believe, right? So communicating that care and saying that this relationship is meaningful. This relationship is important to me. It's important enough to be uncomfortable for you, right? I wrote an article recently with this idea that some people can have as a tool people can use if hello, welcome, hi, a tool that people can use ahead of time. If you're walking into a difficult conversation, if you know you're going to that family dinner and Uncle Jerry's going to be there, and you know that you always get into it, you're always getting in a fight, right? You might agree ahead of time to say, we're going to talk about stuff, you know, we can talk about politics and religion, but maybe we agree ahead of time not to try to change each other's mind. And that does a couple of things, right? It makes space for people to be where they are. It lowers animosity. It increases curiosity. If you know someone's not hell-bent on changing you and controlling you, you have more freedom to be like, oh, well, actually tell me what you're going to tell me, because I'm not afraid of being converted, right? It makes space for people to change their mind without shame or without feeling like they lost, because you can ask questions and have this space to share ideas, right? And then someone can say, oh, I never thought about it that way, without feeling like someone's going to go, gotcha, you know? And it also means that people won't control you. You can say, if they're trying to convert you and be controlling with you, hey, we agreed. You can't, you know, we agreed not to do this, right? This is one tool that you could use. Don't have to, but it's something that you could use if you find that you're always getting gridlocked and things are always getting heated. This is a way to de-escalate before this situation happens. Here's where we talk about winning. It's important in my belief, and we can, maybe there are differences of opinion on this, but to focus on seeing people instead of winning. What does seeing mean? It means really trying to understand, and this is hard when you really disagree with somebody, you think that they're super wrong about something. Trying to understand the person's heart, their worries, their fears, and their loves, the meaning beneath their words and their tone. And again, this stops short at giving a platform to people who are openly trying to be hateful and bigoted and embrace really harmful ideas, right? But a lot of times, you know, like we talked about polarization in the beginning of the conversation, people's fears are driving. And if you can really get into those fears and unlock that and say, hey, you're afraid of this, but maybe you don't have to be afraid here, right? Maybe that can open up some conversations, but you can't really know that until you get to know the person and really see them, right? Seeing is better for community than winning because it doesn't attack, it seeks to understand. So it tries to share power. When you try to see someone, you're taking the lead and choosing to see them. You can also ask them to see you. And again, that gets really difficult, especially when you're dealing with historic power imbalances, right? And historic levels of oppression, where people with privilege are used to being coddled and used to being deferred to and used to being seen, but will not return the favor or don't know how to return the favor, who have never been taught to return the favor or refuse to return the favor, right? But all to say, if in an ideal world we could all do this for each other, what we would be doing is radically humanizing each other, right? And again, that's an antidote to that polarization, that dehumanization process that happens when we fear each other, when we reject each other, when we hate each other, to radically humanize someone we disagree with. Any thoughts on this so far, anyone?
I think the seeing part is definitely key, right? And you tapped into a thought process, the fear of losing, and it may be, and maybe it's not, staunch understanding of power, like I'm going to lose power, because people are not often thinking that in their fear of not being seen, they think they're going to lose their own humanity. And letting them know, like, I see you and I'm not trying to change you. I'm not trying to win this conversation. I'm just having it. It kind of gives a person back what they feel like they may be losing, the power of self. So I think that's a very psychological way to, approach it. I'm not trying to win this. I mean, and it does help you. And I think in the last one you talked about that as well. It's about, I really think about, like, I'm just sharing my thoughts with you. Whether you change is up to you. I can't, you can drive a horse to water, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. I'm sharing what I feel with you. If I want to be around you and be in a space, hopefully I feel like I'm open enough to be able to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mel, I think this touches on, I think you and I talked briefly about Stephen Covey's habits, 7 habits, in one of our phone conversations, if I'm recalling. But one of the ones that resonates the most with me is seek first to understand, then to be understood. So he calls it emphatic listening. So I think that this really fits in with that. It seeks to understand. Don't judge and conclude, but focus on seeing. And I think companion to that is seeing and listening.
Yeah. Thank you. So on that note of control and persuasion, I've never myself, and really never known anyone else, to change their mind on something after being screamed at and called stupid. Ever. I don't know if you all know anyone who said, "You're stupid." Oh my God, you're right. Let me have the epiphany. That's not how it works, right? And there is a reason for that. When we're screamed at, our bodies surge with stress hormones like cortisol that actually inhibit the learning of new information. So we go into fight or flight mode. We can't learn new information. We can't process because we're operating in our reptilian brain. We're just in survival mode. We're not going to be able to have curiosity. We're not going to be able to have inquiry, right? So that's something to keep in mind, right? If you want someone to change their mind, the worst thing you can do is escalate and scream it. That's the worst thing you can do. And I think a lot of times we choose to be cathartic in the moment because we're so frustrated. It feels good to yell at someone sometimes for us, but a lot of times it doesn't accomplish what we want in the long term. So just thinking about the efficacy of that, right? There's a really interesting theory in psychology that I love to talk about. It's called reactance. It's the idea that people will rebel when their ideological options are limited. And you can see that a lot right now in anti-mask wearing. You can't tell me what to do, right? If you present, reactance theory is this: if you present someone with 6 Skittles and you say you can only eat the purple one, most people will go, well, why can't I eat the other ones? I want to eat the other ones. Let me do it, right? So people will rebel. And when you approach someone and say you're not allowed to think or believe other things, right? That really is being like policing someone's thoughts and their free will. So I think as much as we think we're right, and we might be totally right in what we're saying, you're not allowed to believe these other things, creates a backfire effect, right? Backfire effect actually has a very specific meaning. It means when people are presented with alternative evidence for a faulty belief. Like if they believe something's not true, the earth is flat, they believe the earth is flat, and you present them with all this evidence saying, no, the earth is round, here's why. Boom, 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 boom. Backfire effect is that the flat earther would dig in their heels harder on their faulty belief because they're resisting change, right? And there's a reason for that. The reason is because our ideas and our beliefs and the way we think is linked to each other, right? So when you're changing your opinion about one thing, it's often causing a domino effect on all these other things that will need to change in your life, right? As a result, which might even impact your identity and your relationships. So when you're asking someone to change their mind about something, you're not just asking for that one thing. You're asking for a whole shift in their cognition, a whole shift in their structure of meaning. So it can feel very threatening. Like actually, neurological scans have shown that when people's ideas are attacked, the same areas of our brain that register that we're under a physical attack will light up. We register it as a physical attack a lot of times. So just this idea that using domination, using control only perpetuates domination control, that can be a very violent way of communicating. Sharing power is the goal. Now, we still have to say hard things. We still have to speak truth to power, right? But I think there are ways we can do it that gear toward that efficacy. That said, sometimes there are some things that are just never going to be pleasant to hear, and people are always going to feel attacked or claim that they're attacked no matter how you say it. So, you know, it's something we have to balance. But I also want to say that making strong ethical arguments also combats the cycle of misinformation and conspiracy theories, right? So I'm sure people have thoughts on that. Any of this. Yeah.
It makes me think of, I was watching The View one day, and Meghan McCain was like, are you just gonna throw away the Constitution? And people were like, nobody said it there, but I'm home watching it like, yes. It doesn't slap like that. It's not what it's hitting for. It's not fancy. I mean, it's not great. So in that thought process, but that means that people have to change their entire ideology. And I think that it makes me think of, and what they were talking about was wanting to take down Mount Rushmore, right? And they were like, you just want to change the entire Constitution. Well, yes, that's part of the idea, but thinking that you have to change everything about yourself, that domino effect is real. People feel like you're taking everything away from me. My entire identity is going to be stripped from me. So yeah. I think that that backfire effect is real for folks. I think we see that politically, where people think that the dominant culture, especially dominant white culture, is going to become a minority, so it will change their entire outlook on life and what they've experienced thus far, whether the life that they live is great or not, right? It will change their entire outlook.
Yeah, absolutely.
The unknown.
The unknown, yeah, it's a fear of the unknown. I could talk for a long time just about emotional regulation. If you're interested in this, I've got a whole chapter in my book dedicated to this. I can send you the PDF if you'd like. If you don't want to buy the book, it's such an important chapter. It was an important chapter for me to write and explore, just to understand an emotion positive view of emotion, that our emotions are us taking care of ourselves. They're us taking care of us, and how to pay attention to our emotions, how to regulate our emotions while honoring those emotions, right? And I split it off into this metaphor of we really have two rivers of emotion. We have our self-protection river, which is the immediate fight or flight. And actually there are 6 F's that psychologists have now identified, and as well as a 7th called fawn. So that's an interesting thing to research if you're wanting to know more about this kind of topic. So there's a whole self-protection, our fight or flight sympathetic system response. And then we have this deeper, slower river that I call the meaning-making river, which is our grief ability. And a lot of times what happens when we have these difficult conversations, our self-protection river is raging. We're fighting, we're flying, we're amped up, right? That feeling of being amped up. But underneath it, a lot of times what happens is that we're grieving. We're grieving in these deeper, more profound ways, right? This long, slow anger that the world is not what it should be. And the world has left some people without resources or without love or without care, right? And so I think it's important to pay attention to what we're feeling in that moment, because a lot of times if we don't attend to our own emotions, they can bubble out and cause damage, right? So I'm not saying don't have emotions. I'm saying use it as a source of intelligence while you're having these conversations, you know, and thank yourself for having emotions. Your emotions tell you important information. Yeah. Another small tool you can use is using I speak instead of all speak. I think, Tychelle, you said this earlier. Speaking for ourselves, you know, in my opinion, I feel, in my experience, this is the story that happened to me. You know, your story is really powerful. Try to not use grand sweeping statements. I get in trouble with this all the time, all the time. And people call me out, which they should, right? Speaking from personal experience and what it's not humility. It's more just trying to, what it is, it really is a de-escalation tool, because as soon as you say all white people are this way, someone's going to say, nah, I knew this one person who wasn't that way, and therefore you're wrong. So it's actually a lot easier to debate down and shoot down all speak, if you're speaking from your own personal experience, in my experience, this is what I've seen, right? It's a lot harder to shoot down someone's personal experience in their personal story. So it's kind of a way to buffer yourself and keep animosity low and not get the conversation sidetracked. Tychelle, I want you to talk about this one because we had a conversation about it before the call today. Would you mind taking this slide?
Yeah, no problem. So we were talking about, and I was talking about cancel culture. People tend to, I look at cancel culture in two ways, right? What cancel culture really is and what people think cancel culture is, right? So cancel culture in this, it's kind of like the colloquium where people say, oh, like I'm bipolar. Like, no, you had two emotions in one day, you're not bipolar. Like you use it very colloquially. So we'll say, you can get canceled, but it's very unlikely that people get canceled for non-extreme measures. What cancel culture was actually built around was taking your money away from celebrities that you don't agree with, right? And that should be how cancel culture is used. And people say put your money where your mouth is. Well, take your dollars away from things that you don't believe in, and that's okay, right? If I don't believe in it, I'm not canceling you. I'm not going to fund you, right? So when we look at it from that way, so calling out, using the important tools at our disposal for public figures. That can be toxic for individual relationships though. So you're not gonna cancel your grandma. That's why we're here. You don't want to cancel your grandma, right? And thinking about it that way.
You might want to.
You may want to. And so I think about it, and we talk a little bit about shame. So I think about a little bit of shame, right? The little bit of shame that we have usually is called humility, right? That's your humility rather than being actual shame. Consider whether shame is necessary. Remember, it's not just the words, it's the entire way of thinking, right? People are not made up of individual acts. It's an entire cosm around who they are. So it's thinking about their words and trying to be, for you to try to be an educator. So we talked a little bit about this before, right? Sometimes things happen in the moment and you want to take a person aside. If it's a personal, that makes it a lot easier to take them aside if you know them personally. That doesn't always work if you're in a group of people and you want to address something someone said in a group, right? That's why the caveat there, if it makes sense to do so, then you take that person aside. Share how their use of the offense of the term made you feel. That's really the psychological part of it, really engaging with what you said was hurtful because, especially if you are a member of a group that they are disrespecting or calling out or something like that. And trying to be constructive, right? So we talk about, and I'll kind of sum that up in the looking at the calling a person in versus calling them out, right? The way I tend to do that is I'll let a person know that they are valued. We talked about this earlier on before, and letting them know, like, hey, what you said earlier bothered me because, or when you said this, it said something. So really that's not, I'm calling you out, you're wrong. That's really what calling out is. But calling in is also a way to repair a relationship and saying that I value you and I want to keep you. So I'm going to work on us being able to engage further. So I'm going to tell you or talk to you about, not just tell you, because we're not talking at them, we're talking with them. I'm going to talk to you about what happened. I want to talk to you about this. And I've had to do that for many of folks. And I've said it directly to Melody. No, I don't call people out. I'm trying to call you in. Like, let's have a conversation about what's happening because, and then if that person is willing, right? Because all of these conversations assume that the other person is also willing to have a conversation with you, right? That shows the maturity that they're ready to have a conversation. Nobody is comfortable being told that they did something wrong. Your immediate response is to say, I didn't mean to do that. That's what we talk about, the intent versus the impact. They want to state their intentions, right? Versus the impact that it had on a person. So when you're having that conversation, you can say, it was really hard for me to come and talk to you about this, but I did it because I still want to have a relationship with you. So I think about the calling a person in versus calling them out. When I get so wrapped up in going back to the thought of process of cancel culture, I get so for me, there are certain people who deserve to be canceled, right? There was a nurse, there was a white nurse who was making a baby in the NICU dance and calling the baby names. That lady needed to be canceled. She needed to lose her job, right? Because she was making it unsafe for someone, right? A lot of people we think are being canceled are not necessarily, we're not asking them, we're not taking their entire livelihood away from them. And honestly, even when you take your dollars away from a celebrity, that doesn't mean their entire life has been canceled. That maybe they will lose a job, maybe they won't, but you are not putting money where in a person that you don't believe in. I think about this. When I was having this conversation with Melody earlier, I talked about R. Kelly. Like, I'm not going to support his music endeavors because I don't believe in some of the things that happened in his life or that he put forth and that came out about him, right? I am not calling him in, and I'm also not calling him out. I'm just not supporting that in the cancel culture. Did you want to add anything to that, Melody?
That was great. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. You know, every once in a while, shame is necessary, right? It's a necessary public tool that we have at our disposal. Like, but as far as like across the Thanksgiving dinner table, right? Maybe think about that, whether that and what could be more effective, right, for the relationship, like you said, Tychelle. Thank you. And then a note on this. This is something I've had to learn the hard way. Different people have different tolerance levels to talk about the negative, the problems of the world. I can talk about the problems of the world for 3 hours and deconstruct everything. And I can just talk about it and rave about it, right? And say all the things that we need to fix. But someone in my family, after 20 minutes of that, might start feeling like the sky is falling, the world is ending, and might feel like it's just doomsday, right? Like feel that bubbling up of fear. And so, you know, there might be, in some cases, fragility involved in that should be called in on, called out, called in. But to know that sometimes it's possible to talk about the same exact issues, but talk about them in the positive sense, not just the negative sense. For example, what does justice look like, or what should justice look like, instead of just what does injustice look like, right? Casting vision and hope for the future. So you're really talking about the same exact ideas, but you're casting them in the positive. If you know you're dealing with someone who's freaking out, who's panicking, who's afraid, and tensions are rising, this is another de-escalation tool. Switching it to the positive, same exact idea, but in the positive. Calling attention to things like love, patriotism, pride. These are values that are hard to argue with, right? You can talk about how you see these values differently. But really this idea of trying again to overcome fear and to offer hope. And again, in some situations, this really would be too Pollyanna. This doesn't work. There are just some things that we need to talk about that can't be put in the positive. There's no positive about it. They're too grievous. They're too intense. They're too deep. But this is just one tool at your disposal if you should choose to use it. And finally, some more tools. It's healthy to take breaks. It is healthy. Don't feel bad for needing to compartmentalize your relationship, right? Few relationships can exist just on debate alone all the time, 24/7. If you need to set a timer for 20 minutes and talk about that thing for 20 minutes and then say, okay, now we're going to make some pie and talk about TV, you know, and celebrate the win, right? Wow, look at that. We talked for 20 minutes and didn't fight. Last time we could only talk for 10 minutes and fought, right? So kind of exercising that muscle together. If you have to keep things light to lower animosity, sometimes it can be appropriate to make a joke, not always, but that's another tool at your disposal. And then you can also say, you know what, I want to continue this conversation again at a later date. Right now, let's focus on the relationship, but next week, let's plan to sit down and have a conversation together, right? So you're not avoiding, you're delaying, and you're being strategic about that, and making sure you can enjoy quality time. And the reason I say that is because, these bonds that we have with our loved ones make us who we are. They shape our humanity, right? Without the memories we make with our loved ones, we don't have a sense of community. We don't have a sense of place, a sense of self. These are really important bonds. And I see so many relationships fracturing and crumbling right now. And it's tragic. It's tragic, right? Because those are the things that make us human in many ways. And sometimes it's necessary, but I specifically see people like white friends who have gobs of privilege, right? And they're like, oh, I just can't handle how racist that person is, so I'm just going to cut him out of my life. But when that happens, they lose the ability to have those conversations with that person, right? Using their privilege, right? And maybe that's sometimes necessary, but those same people will often say, well, I'm just triggered. But you're white. Like, how are you triggered over this? I don't know. Anyone else have thoughts about that? Tychelle, we've talked about this in the past. Should we just cut people off? Should we just cut them out?
Some people, yes. Some people, no. I mean, it really depends. If you feel like, and this is when you talked about this in the beginning, you have to assume that this assumes that you want to keep that relationship. And some people will work. You will do all of this work, right? And you will try, but that may not be the relationship there for you to keep. Some of these things, it's harder with family, I'm sure, than it is with friends. For friends, I'm sure it's very hard, but with family, it's harder because those are supposed to be your people, right? Yeah. And I get that for folks, but you also have to keep one of the things that we didn't talk about here is, well, you also have to keep your own humanity, right, in that. So if this person does not respect your humanity, right, then you have to have the agency to say, you know what, this relationship isn't for me, or it's for me in very small quantities, in very small time sections. And somehow Thanksgiving and Christmas tend to be that. Christmas very differently. Thanksgiving happens a lot for people where they feel like they have to go home, right? But if it doesn't feel like home, you don't have to be there. One of the things, another tool that I was thinking about as you were talking, and I think it fits into some of those, is really asking questions, right? If you're assuming that person, you're not trying to change them and you're not trying to win this argument, you can really just ask questions. Why do you feel that way? What comes up for you there? Where did you learn that? Not hear that, because then they'll think that you're trying to tell them that everything they hear is fake news. But you'll say, oh, where did you learn that? Like, how did you, and if you assume that in best intentions to have that conversation, and use your best intention, not assume best intentions, but why do you think that? Where did that come from? And not in a sarcastic way. They may say, well, I learned that this happened. There are going to be people who you just want to be like, no, that's wrong. That's not going to work. Like that is false, right? But these are the flies that you want to catch with honey. Sometimes you only have vinegar, and that's okay too. But you have to, for me, and also that's a good measure, I think, for people to understand. And this is about that taking a break, like understand your limits in having these conversations, right, with folks, because you can't save everyone. And I think we talked about this a lot in the anti-racism course that we did together, is that you cannot move somebody from one end. So imagine it like a speedometer. You can't take somebody from 60 to 0 or 0 to 60. You're trying to lower, right? If somebody's at 30, they may be ready to go to 15, but nobody at 60 is ready to go to 0. Yep. Like, that's just not a thing. So you want to be moving people over. You're not trying to necessarily win them. You're not trying to win even if you're trying to win an argument, go ahead, like that, maybe you will, but even in those, and I've done that. I was on social media not too long ago, and somebody was making ridiculous comments about why we shouldn't have $15 as a living wage. And they were like, well, I run a business and I don't want to pay people. I can't afford to pay people $15. I said, well, you can't afford to have a business. And they were like, but I can pay people $10 an hour. And I said, okay, so maybe you should take a smaller salary so they can have a living wage. And he was really dead set on the fact that the $10 is better than 0. And I said, yeah, but a living wage is better than not living wage. Like, what are we talking about? And for me, I was resigned in that conversation that I wasn't trying to change him. It was every comment he made to me, I just laughed at it and I kept going until I was exhausted, right? Because no matter how, like, some people, when they're having conversation, have circular logic, right? So they're just dancing around in a circle. So nothing you say to them makes sense, right? And they can keep going because you're trying to inject logic and they're not, right? And they're just, so they can just talk and talk and talk because you're trying to make sense of something, and they're like, yes, but you're like, so if you put blue and yellow, it will make green. They're like, yes, but green is a color that lives in the forest. You're like, wait, what? Right? And you're having this conversation. You're like, that is not what we're talking about. You're like, and then they say, and you're like, so, but no, but blue and yellow make green. And they're like, yes, but did you know that green is a color? And you're like, no. Right, and it frustrates you, but they've moved past that to a completely different thing, right? So really understanding, like, I'm gonna take a break. I'm not trying to win you over. Asking them questions, really ask, because sometimes also that helps a person reveal. Maybe this is the debater in me that also reveals somebody's like fault in their logic when you ask them questions and they don't have the answer. But if you ask them, why do you think that? Why do you feel that way? You may get at either you can win or you may get at their humanity, one or the other, and being able to do so, to have these conversations with them. I have let go of people, not because I disagreed with them, but because I disagreed with the morality which they were making that decision. The decision is what it is. The thought process is what it is, right? But why they think so. Like, I am a person I would rather not see capitalism. And I have friends who absolutely want to be millionaires and be capitalists. And I'm not going to cancel you or not be friends with you because we see that differently. We can just talk about what that he looks like humanely for certain people. And we can agree to disagree, or we can agree that we both want people to live happily and healthily. And we live within a capitalist system. So whether I'm right or not doesn't really even matter, right? I said a lot of things there. I'm sorry. I was just thinking about all of these different things happening.
You're touching on so many important things, especially, like there is a level of healthy disagreement we need for our society to function properly, right? But there are things outside those bounds of what's considered healthy disagreement, to where you're getting into like nonsense land. So you said something so wise, I think, Tychelle, and that I just like want to reiterate. No one goes from 0 to 60 or 60 to 0 in a single conversation. Like, I mean, if that does happen, it's extremely rare. So how can you just, I guess the metaphor would be, move the needle a little bit, in these conversations, transformation like that, someone changing their whole framework of their mind, that's a long process. That's a long game, right? You're not gonna, I think a lot of times we just try to go in with nuclear weapons, right? When we should be planting seeds and like trying to help those seeds grow. So thinking about the cultivation, the education, why do you think that? Asking great questions is a way to see someone and show them you see them and show them you care about them. I think that's just completely wonderful. And I've seen this a lot more effective than attack mode in my life. Yeah.
Right.
No.
I mean, you have to also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just, a recent example of where I felt I needed to take a break. And this caught me off guard, but I was calling down to my Texas cousins. You've heard me mention them. Try and keep this short. So it was some family news. And so I had my cousin by marriage on the phone, and really barely greeted me before he said, "Has your house burned down yet?" And I knew what he meant, but I waited for him to explain, and he did. And he said, and I quote, "Oh, because although Black Lives Matters posters or protesters and Antifa are burning the city of Minneapolis." And I just like, boy, I just thought, you seriously said that now? And my brain was elsewhere, but I thought, okay, don't damage this relationship for good. But I think I'd said something to the effect, it would be good for you to consult some sources, because number one, the city is not burning. And my daughter lives within a couple miles of downtown Minneapolis, so she would see the flames, but it's not. There's unrest and violence, yes, as with a lot of cities, especially the last few months. Number two, check your sources, because, to chalk that all up, it's just patently false. Mm-hmm. It is not Black Lives Matters, and Antifa is an ideology. We can go on a whole riff with that. So I I don't know. I thought, boy, I can't really start because I will lose it. I will lose it with this person whom I've always had regard for. So anyway, I thought I just got to park this. I need to say something. And he kind of like, oh, really? It's not just those two groups? And I said, no. And, do some further research. But I thought I got to kind of put a stake in the ground because he's insulting right now.
Yeah.
I felt it personally, he's insulting the city, and yeah, there's more unrest. It's a whole complex web of reasons for that, because I've been doing some reading and just, talking to people who live there, for Pete's sake. Anyway, I'll stop, but I thought I need to say something, but then I just need to park it, or I'm just really going to let him have it.
I'm glad you said something, and that's a good approach. Check your sources.
Yeah.
Where are you getting this information, right?
Yeah.
And I think too, and what is concerning to me is that, I had someone on social media today. I made a video about the fact that there's been a war in our minds and a war on truth. We're being taught to disrespect or mistrust journalists and experts and academics and scholars, people who dedicate their life, scientists, to the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of truth. And I had someone comment on there, journalists are paid by billionaires to lie to us.
Oh, boy.
This is where we're at. This is where we're at as people, right? There's a shockingly high number of adults in the world who are openly embracing misinformation. And that's why very concerning, Hall, because I wonder if he would go away and go back and check his sources, but his sources would be telling him that Minneapolis is being burned down by Antifa, right? So that's where it gets really, really strange.
Yeah. I said credible. I said
credible sources.
Exactly. But it's all wrapped up in the conspiracy theories, and it's all, I'm just putting it out there, it's all wrapped up in evangelical Trumpism. That's exactly what's behind it.
Yeah.
And
this start to ask questions.
Yeah. What?
About asking whose house has been burned down? Has there been a house that's been burned down?
Well, and I don't even live in the city. I mean, it's like you forgot. It just was, but it felt really
trying
insulting.
to rile you up.
It felt like an attack, and he thought it was a joke, so that kind of made it even worse.
It's passive aggressive.
I've had somebody
sure.
say that, and it's like, oh, I was in St. Louis after Mike Brown was killed, probably 2014 sometime, and somebody said, well, they're burning down their own houses, and I was like, that's nobody is burning down their own house.
I know.
That is not a thing.
It's a bear factory.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure, well, I'm guessing he has seen some manufactured pictures of the city in flames, and it just, anyway, I'll leave it alone, but it just, and it's not the first time it's happened to me. You just got to step away. Got to step away. But
well, I like your approach, though, to say something. You can't just let it go and avoid it. You say something, right? You confront it.
Yeah. And he kind of said, oh, really? And anyway, and I was
maybe you planted it. You did what Melody said. You planted a seed.
Yeah, I found they're kind of impervious to, the truth. But I was also, my daughter, and this is Mel's cousin, she's 27. She was relating this exactly today in a series of texts. Former coworker and good friend is just all caught up in these scientific conspiracy theories about anti-vaccine and COVID hoax, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so anyway, it seems to be the theme for the day in the last couple of days, but it just, I'll stop after I say I'm feeling burnt out by the last 4 years. And so not as much resilience as I'm.
Welcome to the club of the last 35 from me.
Yeah, I know. And it's not just war, but it's particularly. So, so that.
It's overwhelming. It is overwhelming.
Yeah, it might mean I don't engage or perhaps opt out more than I might otherwise. Maybe that's self-preservation, but maybe that's just healthier right now.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to you.
Yeah, so a couple more slides here and we can keep talking if you like. So these are just some simple ideas for just trying to navigate the conflict, getting creative, agreeing on which topics you will discuss, which you will stay away from. That's perfectly legitimate. If you know that there's one topic that just no one's going to budge on, everyone knows where each other stands and you're not going to move the needle either way, or agree to disagree ahead of time. Create ground rules ahead of time, create boundaries. You can delegate a referee. If there's someone in the group who's really good at keeping peace, they can be the person to be like, hey, okay, time out. And then you can try things like articulating the other person's perspective and asking them to articulate yours and see if they've actually been listening to you, they should be able to tell you back what you've been saying, right? Or they're going to be slanting it and you can clear up misinformation. You can also check out resources. I've actually recently launched a beta version of a conversation game, which is available for free on my website. So you can check that out if you're looking for tools to do in groups with groups of people that can help stage these difficult conversations. And what we'll end with is something really uncomfortable. Agreement may not be possible, right? Because like we've established, we can't force people to change their minds. We can't. It's not right. It's not ethical, right? We might try, we might beg, we might scream, we might cry, especially in cases where injustice or oppression is happening. But you know, and I guess that is a larger question. To what degree do you use force and violence, especially when the stakes are extremely high, right? And this is a conversation I've had with Tychelle actually in the past over certain questions. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, can we stay in a relationship even if we never agree with this person? And what is it about? You know, Tychelle, you said something about, to the extent of like picking your battles, right? There's some issues that don't matter as much. There's some issues that are life and death, right? So if we can stay in a relationship with someone, even if we don't agree, how can we make the relationship stronger and more resilient so that it can handle the weight of that disagreement and not break? So focusing on mending the relationship, making the relationship stronger and healthier. And then it's a valid question to ask, is my commitment to my beliefs stronger than my commitment to that certain relationships? And yes is a valid option. Sometimes we need to draw a line in the sand. It's right to draw a line in the sand and say, I will no longer interact with you. And I think it's important, if we're going to make that decision, to communicate clearly what's happening and to say, I don't want to make this decision, but you have chosen to embrace beliefs that are separating us. You have done this. This is not me being mean. This is not me punishing you. This is me saying, I can't be in a relationship with you because of what you have chosen to embrace. This is your issue that you need to sort out because you are embracing hatred or domination or dehumanization or oppression, right? So if you figure that out, come back, we'll be good, right? So I think putting the onus on them instead of saying, oh, I'm just going to be over here, offended, right? And it's my problem. No, this is not my problem. This is your problem. You are the one who is embracing hatred. Can we find shared values that we can focus on in the midst of disagreement? Holly, you said something about that earlier. What are the things we can agree on and celebrate together, if there are any? And at the end of the day, what keeps us in community, and why are we in community? And I think that's a really real question to ask. Why are we doing this? And like I said earlier, these bonds are what make us human. That said, and I want Tychelle to talk more about this because we had a really poignant conversation, I think the last class of our anti-racist group, where we were talking about how sometimes, in order to stand up for what you believe in, some sacrifices are going to be necessary, right? In order to really make a stand about something. So I'd love, Tychelle, for you to talk about that more and your thoughts about that.
So for me, I look at family as, and I'm going to take because we talk about the holidays, and that's usually very, we're talking about family there. For me, I think you have to also measure why and who your family is. And I know that's not always popular with folks, but for me, I learned at an early age that my parents were just people who had a baby, right? So I look at and as an adult, I look at my parents not as these, holding them up as these figures, but really, and I say parents, and I can talk about siblings as well, but as people, right? And I don't always agree with every single person. That doesn't mean that if something, I'm in good standing with both my parents, but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't be there for them if a life and death situation happened for them specifically. But so I have a younger brother and a younger sister, and both my younger brother and younger sister are a part of the LGBTQ community. I have other siblings as well. And they both came out to my parents, and my parents were not thrilled. And more specifically, having the conversation with my father was like, well, you told me to always stick with my brothers and my sisters, and we'll stop talking to you. And I was okay with that because I knew that I was convicted in how I felt about my sibling being able to just live their life, right? That's one cosm. We've gotten over that. Me and my dad have knockdown, drag out battles where we yell and scream and whatever, and then he will call and joke a moment later about things. We don't have a difference in ideology on many things, and if he does, he knows to keep it to himself for the rest of his days. But I think a lot of times you have to measure how you feel about something and how it's not. So I think about it a little bit differently than are my convictions about this topic more important than this person, because it's not a topic or person. We have to look at some of the things that we're talking about, especially when we're talking about the politically, are other people as well, and not just thought process. One of the things you said really made me think, though, when you say to a person, I don't want to deal with you. That happens more on the liberal side of folks than it does on the conservative side of folks. And I say that because they'll say, well, we can just agree to disagree and we'll be in community. Well, that doesn't matter. That doesn't sit well if what we're disagreeing about is humanity, right? So it's hard. So, and that also, this is like, we have to have good faith arguments, right? We have to know that we're both coming to this conversation to have a conversation, because if you walk away, they will feel like they won, right? And sometimes you have to sit and be okay with that as well. You can say, I'm okay with you feeling like you won this conversation, but we're not having the same conversation right now, or I'm not going to engage with you on this topic anymore if you're not going to use reason and logic, or you're going to get so dug in that we're not having a conversation and you're just talking at me, or you're shooting down everything I say. So I think sometimes that's a measured conversation on that. When we're talking specifically about being able to, it's in the self-preservation part of it, some of these things will make you a better debater, because that's what it's really about. I think the best debaters understand that everybody's argument has points to it that are useful and good and righteous, or that make sense, right? If you've ever been on an actual debate team, and I've moderated some debates, then you know, whether you agree or not, it's really about whether the argument is good. And I think we think about these things, and they're not necessarily about the argument. They're about they're about being humane and being able to be in conversation with a person. And are we asking people to give up their fathers, mothers, sisters, and brothers? No. But sometimes that will those people will eliminate themselves from your life, or you won't feel comfortable in these spaces, and about giving up parts of you. This our classroom members, and they were saying, well, I really like going, and I'll use the analogy without the person, I really like going camping to this place. This is where I feel more relaxed at. And I said, but the people who were at this campsite really bother me. I said, well, either you'll continue to go camping and you won't talk about the things that really mean something to you, or you won't be comfortable there anymore. Sometimes you just outgrow spaces and places and things and people, and that's okay too. And it hurts sometimes when it's family, right? Because you grew up with them, you don't think you'll outgrow them. It hurts sometimes in your wallet when you think, I don't want to do this job anymore because I can't with you all and you people in this thing. But it's like, okay, until I transition, I will make this work for me. And I don't have to engage, because that's also a thing. Like, I'm going to withdraw my engagement because you don't get to have a conversation with me. You just don't get to. Right? That's a part of it. Like, no, I'm not gonna, nope, I'm not gonna engage with you, because you're not having good faith arguments. we're not talking about things. I mean, a lot of what Melody talked about today here is really understanding the humanity of other people, but you also have to you also want to make sure that they're understanding the humanity of you.
Yes.
And if they are not, then you don't need to have a conversation with them, right? You can not have respect for people, but you can admire or engage with people from afar. Hey, how are you? I hope you're doing well. I had a supervisor once who was the most despicable supervisor I have ever had. Like, she was, well, probably not, because that was a few years ago. You get a couple every year, but or get ones as the years go on. And she lost her job way after I stopped working at this place. And I don't wish her any ill. I wish that she learns the lesson that the world has for her and that it makes her a better person. And I can't decide, right, what those lessons are, because I don't live the life she lives. I don't experience the emotions she's experiencing. And I can say that really calmly and hope and with hope now, because I don't have to engage with that bitch. Like, I don't have to engage with her on a daily basis anymore. So I hope that she gets the lessons in life, because hopefully she won't harm anyone else, and hopefully she won't feel harmed, which is probably why she was doing the harm. You know, the saying that hurt people, right? So, and maybe she, you know, a lot of the times, and this is the psychological part of it, a lot of times when people feel harm, they feel like they need to lash out at other people, or they feel a locus of power taken away from them. So they try to grasp it in any way that they can. So I can say, I hope that your Thanksgiving goes well, Uncle Ted. I'm not going to be there. And hopefully you'll enjoy watching the football game and eating over the turkey that, you know, presides over the rape and pillage the village of Native America, whatever you want to do. But I don't want to be there to engage with you about it, right? I'm not in the habit of sitting around people I'm uncomfortable with. I'm just not going to do it. Not for the sake of, we only have to do it once a year. Well, I'll come, or start having them. We're going to have it here. Do you want to come here? Do you want to, you know, engage with me up here? And people will, or they won't. And that's okay. That's okay as well. You want people to make sure that they have your humanity as well. So maybe that's a good conversation starter. You know, how do you feel about me, and why do you think the things you think about, the things that I care about are nonsense, or what made you feel the way you do?
Yeah, and I think those, I would call that maybe boundaried love, boundaried care. I'm going to love you from afar. I'm going to set strong boundaries around what I need, and saying, this is what I need. I need you to, show me respect. I need you to respect my right to believe what I want to believe, right? I need you to not talk about this certain thing. I need you to share your sources, or we're just not going to have a conversation, right? And I think that can be a really strong message to send to people, to just say, I don't want to talk to you about this because you are not arguing in good faith. I think even more than saying, hey, you're not arguing in good faith, like withholding the ability to interact with you over that sends a message loud and clear that that's not acceptable to you. Mm-hmm. And sticking by that. And like you said, Tychelle, demanding that our humanity is seen as we are showing humanity to others, and seeing their humanity is very important. So you're right. And that's all wrapped into sharing power.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.